Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors, brothers and sisters. Today is, well, in the original scheme of things, today is tax day. And I looked it up. And taxes come from the original Indo-European root from which we get the word tactile and tactician and intact and other things like that, which means to touch. Now, I'm suspecting that it's probably because when money changed hands, right, that they touched the money. Nevertheless, on this day, a normal scheme of things, you and I would be touched by the government. So, today we are not necessarily being touched by the government because there's been an extension. Nevertheless, today is touched by the government day, tax day. So keep that in mind. Don't let the IRS find you if you're committing malfeasance of some sort. End up like Al Capone, I suppose, right? So I was also considering today talking with somebody at work about music and bands, and he was in a band. He played bass guitar in a band, and I was just thinking about how I just haven't kept up with any modern bands hardly at all. And this has been for about 20 years now. I haven't really kept up with things. I haven't kept up with modern trends very much, or modern fashion trends, and only barely kept up with movies. So I don't know why that is. Something happened 20 years ago. What was it? Roughly 20 years ago, in 2001, something like that. Anyway, and I'm wondering, are there other people out there who are 25 years and older who were changed radically 20 years ago, 2001, 911, 2001? I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear from you if you have gone through a change in the last 20 years significantly, and what the nature of that change is. I think in some ways mine has been a relinquishing of being interested in modernity and being interested in all the latest trends and fashions and things. I mean, that may be in some ways an effect of my liberal arts education, where I ended up having something of a distaste for modern things and hip trends and the latest fashion. And I think that liberal arts education in some ways liberates a person from the tyranny of the now, so that we're thinking more about things that have been around for a long time, or we're thinking about things that have happened before, and the mind is no longer swept up in every little trinket and hoo-ha that comes our way. Perhaps it may be the effect, that jarring effect that occurred back in 2001, that just altered the way that I think about the world. One way or the other, I'd like to hear from you, and put comments in the sections below. What have you gone through a similar thing in the last 20 years? Have you had anything that's changed radically for you since 2001, 911? Because I'd really like to find out. Well, anyway, talking with him and then driving home today, I heard this great band, and just thought I'd put a plug in for them. I mean, there have been bands that I've heard and music that I've heard since I was on radio some 20-something years ago. There have been bands that I've heard that are really good, modern bands that are really good. I'm not opposed to modern bands. I'm opposed to auto-tune, and I'm opposed to a lot of the synthetic, mass-produced music that one hears in popular art these days, and I'm opposed to a great many popular performers just because they seem very trite and very canned to me. But I'm not opposed to good music. So I heard this great band, and I highly recommend it if you like funk music and if you like brass bands. The Black Market Brass Band, and I'll put a link here in the section below. But the Black Market Brass Band, they were great. They had a great bass line to them. They had excellent horn section, but their rhythm section was out of this world. Just amazing rhythm section. So I highly recommend that you check out the Black Market Brass Band. You know, if you wanted to pause this video, if you're watching it later, and go check that out and come back and see me in a second, go pause the video and check it out. The Black Market Brass Band, local a band, as a matter of fact, Minnesota band, and so really neat band to catch the sound of. In fact, I'll pause here for a minute for you, and then maybe you can run away and check it out and come back. Okay, so that's enough pause. In addition to that, you know, I've checked out other bands too that I like, sort of esoteric bands that you wouldn't see otherwise. One of them is the Boards of Canada, which is sort of a moody, atmospheric band. What do they call that type of music? Where it's just atmosphere. They're sort of like that. And then there's another band that I saw, which is really good, or heard that it's really good, called the Grassy Knoll. The Grassy Knoll, sort of like where JFK got shot, you know, the Grassy Knoll down there in Dallas, Texas. And they're a strange kind of, I don't know, kind of scary sound to them, but good. So that's kind of modern, maybe within the last 20 years, but I really haven't listened to a great deal. And I've got an ongoing disagreement, shall we say, no, discussion, shall we say, with a good friend of mine, a man who is, I think, is intelligent, well-read, and well-spoken, and just a wonderful outlook. He's a very generous man, but we disagree on this, in that I think that there's a lot to modern bands that I know of since the 70s, 60s and 70s, which are worthwhile. You know, I think that there's a great deal to be said about the good music that the Beatles did, and Led Zeppelin, and Cream, for instance, or Yes. Those bands, they were phenomenal. They've got a great deal to offer. Jefferson Airplane, ELO, for instance, Chicago, all those great bands, I think, had a lot to offer. And they offered something which is different than, say, Mozart or Bach or Palestrina or Thomas Tallis or William Byrd, all of whom are worthwhile considering. But they're different genres for different occupations, if you will. One wouldn't want to listen to, say, Ramble On during the midst of Mass, or to listen to the Beatles in the midst of a very serious ceremony, you know. But you, on the other hand, when you're going to go out and play soccer or go out for a run or whatever, you might want to listen to something that pumps you up a little bit more. AC/DC, you know, Guns N' Roses, something like that. So I think that it's more, music is more appropriate for the element that you're dealing with. And in that genre, in that vein, I think there's some bands that offer a great deal of goodness. So anyway, I guess this is all to say that I'm recommending the Black Market Brass Band. And I'm also recommending checking out something I saw today, which is called C.S. Lewis Doodles. And it's a really neat YouTube site where they take C.S. Lewis's lectures, you know, The Abolition of Man, Men Without Chests, things like that. And they read them, but then they also offer a doodle that goes along with it, you know, a little drawing that goes along with it. And I'll put a link to that too. Check it out. I mean, if you've never listened to C.S. Lewis, it's really worthwhile to hear what he has to say. And if you're a fan of Lewis, it's really neat to see what they're doing with his stuff. So for our case, we're going to be reading the end part of Romeo and Juliet today. And I have highlighted a number of themes so far for us in Romeo and Juliet. I think that one can say that this is an incarnation, for instance, of the issue of the scholastic problem between nominalists and realists. You know, what do we do with human knowledge? Is human knowledge something that taps into a reality beyond this world? Or is human knowledge something that we just make up because we're intelligent creatures, we're rational creatures? Is human knowledge, like the realists say, tapping into the mind of God himself? Or is belief in God and belief in that other world of the Logos merely a construct of the human mind? You know, that's a really powerful argument, and I think that Shakespeare is embodying it in this play. Mainly, I think he's embodying what happens when the pilgrim the person searching for truth, who otherwise would be a realist searching for the source of truth in the Logos, what happens to him or her when they get sidetracked by something else, mainly by something of this world which seems attractive and is suggesting that all things are relative? That problem that we face with the nominalists and the realists is that the nominalists who say that our language is true only in name, it doesn't tap into something beyond this world, the nominalists tend towards atheism, denial of anything else besides the material world, a reliance on a machine-like vision of human life. And that can be very problematic, because it leads to despair, and it leads to, or it can lead to despair, and it can lead to thinking that the world is no more than squirting juices in the head. So it's highly problematic. It does offer, though, a certain element that we see in the Enlightenment, which is that element of being able to master the world. Because once we see the world as a machine, we can think of the machine and fix the machine, tinker with it like Legos or Tinker Toys. And we can fix it and make it better, improve it. And we, all of us, live in that luxury of improving the world. We live in the luxury of a machine vision of the world. So the nominalists, although they're problematic, they do offer something of value, which is heat in the winter and cool in the summer, and clothing for all, and food on the table, and cash. A highest standard of living than anybody's ever enjoyed before in history. So that element, which we're seeing in the modern world, which is the result of the Enlightenment, is a positive and wouldn't have come without the nominalists. But it's a Faustian bargain. It comes with the element of despair and pointlessness and hopelessness, and no longer seeing your place in the universe, and being constantly petrified that we're going to get hit by a meteor randomly, or going to catch a disease randomly. And people end up living in fear because of the extremes of that nominalist position. But on the other hand, the realist position also has its drawbacks. Realism, which sees that we tap into a world order, sees that we tap into the Logos, or the mind of God, through our language, realism tends to offer a great deal of hope, purpose, point to the world. There's a focus and a design that we are part of. But realism also ends up making a person a little myopic, narrow-minded, set in a box. It has the tendency to make us think only one way and not see other possibilities, and to accept certain things that otherwise we could change or could alter. Realist vision tends to think that the world is laid out already in the mind of God, and is therefore somewhat deterministic, is somewhat set in stone. If there's a pattern to the universe, for instance, and God has created that pattern already, and you're part of that pattern, then every thought, every action, every choice you make is already known in the mind of God. So is there any chance that you're a free individual? If we are realists on the extreme level, right, there is no free will. All of it is fate. All of it is laid down already. And your choices and my choices, they don't really matter, because our fate is already set for us. And we see that in characters like John Calvin, for instance, or Zwingli in the Protestant Reformation that occurs in the 1600s. So I think what we're seeing in Shakespeare is we're seeing an embodiment of that realism or nominalism in its extremes by itself is highly problematic and ends up being lethal. And certainly realists who fall for nominalism in this play end up dead, as we see with Romeo. Is there a solution to this problem? I think there is. I think that there is a solution when we look at nature, and one of the solutions is that you could say a bird flies with two wings. And that would be a solution to the issue. Life is paradoxical, as Frederick Wilhelmsen used to say. The paradox of life, as G.K. Chesterton would point out, is that life is both nominalism and realism at the same time. You know, there's a great koan, for instance, from a Buddhist thought, and the koan says that the monk goes to visit the holy relic, and holding his staff in his right hand, he looks at the relic and says, "It's just a lump of clay. There's nothing there." And he shifts his staff to the left hand, and he says, "Ah, behold the holy relic." It's both at the same time. And I think that paradoxical worldview, which accepts both at the same time, is something which goes all the way back at least to Plato in the Republic and elsewhere. That those great writings of Plato, those great dialogues of Plato, are suggesting that life is itself paradoxical, and one has to kind of accept both positions at the same time. That's tough. That's very difficult. And I would suggest that that's what Shakespeare is embodying in his play, one of the many themes. And it does lead to think about a little bit about something which I think C.S. Lewis brings up. And again, if you haven't seen these videos that were created by the C.S. Lewis Doodles, go check them out. They're really good. But one of the things that Lewis brings up in his essay, A Men Without Chests, is that education used to be about the education of the loves of a person. It was the ordo amoris, the ordering of the loves. That was the primary goal of education. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks, used to say the primary goal of education was to know yourself, nothis eton, and that to know yourself was to balance your affections and your loves appropriately. And as Lewis suggests in The Men Without Chests, the balancing of the loves is to love the right thing in the right way, to the right degree, at the right time. That's what education used to do. It wasn't just learning of facts, nor was it just the learning of a techne, which is learning how to fix a widget or to do plumbing or something. It was about learning how to be human, how to order your loves so that your loves were in the appropriate order to what it meant to be human. And I've thought about that frequently, that as human beings, if you want to do a crude analogy, humans are kind of like an automobile. An automobile runs a certain way if you do certain things to it. If you put certain fluids in the right places, right? And if you drive it a certain way, and if you do regular maintenance, that automobile will run very well. But if you put salt or sugar into the gas tank, it's not going to run well. If you put gas into the windshield wiper reservoir, it's not going to run well. If you drive a Yugo at 180 miles an hour every day, it's going to burn up. That is a crude analogy, but it's like the human machine, if you will. And again, I'm using the terminology of machine, so I'm sorry for that, but there it is. The human machine is built a certain way. And if we do certain things with ourselves, to ourselves, we end up either prospering, flourishing, or crashing and burning. And if we want to crash and burn, we adopt one single idea and we exclude all other ideas. Either nominalism or realism. And when we do that, we end up destroying ourselves as human beings. And that then is, I think, a terrifying prospect, because it means that our choices, our decisions in life are our own. We own those decisions. We own the destiny of our life. And that's something which I think draws us back to the play. Because Shakespeare, like the ancient tragedians, used to say that character is fate. And we determine character by our choices. So if we want to learn how to determine our character, one of the best things we can do is to examine literature, is to examine dramas, because they show us what to do and not to do. They order the emotions, the loves, the ordo amoris, appropriately. They have the possibility of affecting us so that we don't crash and burn, because we learn to love the right things at the right time, in the right way, to the right degree, as Aristotle said. That's why Aristotle's keen in the Poetics of suggesting that tragedy especially has the possibility of having a purgative effect on us. It purges us of the wrong things, and it orders us in the right way. So I don't think when we're reading Romeo and Juliet that it's appropriate for us to ask of questions that are eisegetical. Was Juliet oppressed? Was Romeo a victim of economic oppression? Were Romeo and Juliet just misunderstood teenagers? Those questions, although they might be fun sidelines, are not getting at the main point of the work, the main point of art, the main point of literature. Because the main point of literature or art is to order the affections appropriately. And this we see in Lewis's work elsewhere, in works like the Screwtape Letters, for instance. And by the way, I would highly recommend, if you get the chance, look at my friend Arthur Hippler's lectures on the Screwtape Letters. I'll put a link there in the sidelines, but do look at Dr. Arthur Hippler's Screwtape Letters lectures. They're very fine, and they take you through the Screwtape Letters. And the reason I bring this up is because in the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis constructs a fictional work with two demons talking back and forth to each other. And one of the things that the major demon says to the minor demon when advising him how to get his victim is distract him constantly from the purpose. Distract him with all sorts of things that would take his mind off of what his major goal is in life. And I think that's a very powerful statement that Lewis is making, because all of us tend to get distracted. We get distracted with financial things and health things and family problems and putting dinner on the table and that daily grind that we have to go through. And we lose the point, I think, of life, which is human life is supposed to be for something more than the daily grind. It's supposed to be for something glorious, grand, beautiful. Without that vision, I think, of the grand and the glorious and the beautiful, human life becomes nothing more than an animal existence. A daily repetition of the same thing over and over and over, with no change and no hope for change and no possibility for change. And when we fall into that, we fall into a sort of imprisonment of the mind, I think. A mind-forged manacle, as William Blake called it. And one could say that seeing the world as nothing more than one darn thing after another, that becomes, after a while, a certain living hell. That if we're to look at what heaven and hell mean, if nothing else, they mean a condition in this world of seeing the world as no longer charged with a certain beauty, a certain grandeur, as Gerard Manley Hopkins points out. We see the world as nothing more than just the daily grind. It's one darn thing after another. And when we do that, the only thing we can hope for is physical pleasures and material goods, power over others. And in my opinion, that is the ancient human default. That is power. Power is the ancient human default. And when we fall into that vision of the daily grind, nothing more than this, getting up, going to work, nothing more, then we fall into that vision of power. What's the point, right? What's the point? The only point can be that we have power over others. We have domination over others. That's Screwtape Letters. That's hell. I think that the human default, the tendency of human beings is to fall into that vision, which is a hellish vision. And I think Romeo and Juliet fall into that vision. They long for death. They long for something which is not glorious, not beautiful, not wonderful. There's more to life than just the daily grind. And if we see life as only the daily grind, same darn thing, different day, right? Then we end up being no more than a trousered ape, as C.S. Lewis calls it. A grunt, right? We lose that thing which distinguishes us as human beings. And the only thing that we can look forward to is a cessation of the pain of daily existence. I would encourage anyone who is viewing to not fall into that, to realize that there's a great deal more to life than that. And we see that in the glorious vision that Shakespeare suggests, hints at in his play. And one thing I have not brought up, and I perhaps will do this at some future date, but one thing I've not brought up is Shakespeare is giving us that glorious vision, even in the midst of the hellish vision of Romeo and Juliet. And how is he doing that? He's doing it in the same way that Dante Alighieri does. Words, right? Dante goes through hell and then purgatory and heaven. But Dante's vision is that the salvation is the poem itself, is the words, the beauty of the words. And in the midst of this play, which I do promise we will finish today, but the beauty of this play is that we're seeing something awful conveyed to us by beautiful words. Words have this amazing power to uplift, to glorify, to make something, even something ugly, into something beautiful. I think Shakespeare was very aware of that. I think he's very aware of the idea that our words have effect on others and have effect on us. And when we start to learn the language of these words, we begin to learn a language that allows us to find a way out of our own little hell, our own little box. There's a great phrase, which I won't bore you with the Latin because I'll probably mangle it anyway, but there's a great phrase from the poet Virgil who says something to the effect, "The gates of hell are open night and day, but to find the right path up to the open air, that is the task, that is the labor." I think that's why we read plays like this, and why we read great literature and great poetry and listen to great music and look at great art. It's not just so we can be uber smart and impress our friends and amuse our enemies. It's not so we can be witty at cocktail parties. The reason that we read these sorts of things is that we all of us need a language, and we need a language that is a language of hope and of joy. This provides that language, even though it's something horrible, because art has this amazing ability to take the most hideous of human failings and make it into something beautiful. Surprisingly so. If you have questions or comments on this, please feel free to write them out. I'd be glad to answer anything. But let's cut to the chase. Enough philosophy on the part of Mr. Lassiter. Let's read Mr. Shakespeare. Act 5. And by the way, if we get all through Act 5, great. It actually moves very quickly, very short. So hopefully you have your Shakespeare with you. You have your daily fortification. Here we go. Act 5, Scene 1, Mantua, a street. Enter Romeo. If I may trust the flattering truth of sleep, my dreams presage some joyful news at hand. My bosom's Lord sits lightly in his throne, and all this day an unaccustomed spirit lifts me above the ground with cheerful thoughts. I dreamt my lady came and found me dead. Strange dream that gives a dead man leave to think, and breathed such life with kisses in my lips that I revived and was an emperor. Ah me, how sweet is love itself possessed, when but love's shadows are so rich in joy. Enter Balthazar, booted. Ah, news from Verona. How now, Balthazar? Dost thou not bring me letters from the friar? How doth my lady? Is my father well? How fares my Juliet? That I ask again, for nothing can be ill, if she be well. Then she is well, and nothing can be ill. Her body sleeps in Capel's monument, and her immortal part with angels lives. I saw her laid low in her kindred's vault, and presently took post to tell it you. Oh, pardon me for bringing these ill news, and since you did leave it for my office, sir. Is it e'en so? Then I defy you, stars. Thou knowest my lodging. Get me ink and paper, and hire post horses. I will hence tonight. Oh, I do beseech you, sir, have patience. Your looks are pale and wild, and do import some misadventure. Tush, thou art deceived. Leave me, and do the thing I bid thee do. Hast thou no letters to me from the friar? No, my good lord. No matter, get thee gone, and hire those horses. I'll be with thee straight. Exit Balthazar. Well, Juliet, I will lie with thee tonight. Let's see, for means. Oh, mischief, thou art swift to enter in the thoughts of desperate men. I do remember an apothecary, and hereabouts dwells, which late I noted in tattered weeds with overwhelming brows, calling of simples. Meagres were his look. Sharp misery had worn him to the bones, and in his needy shop a tortoise hung, an alligator stuffed in other skins of ill-shaped fishes, and about his shelves a beggarly account of empty boxes, green earthen pots, bladders, musty seeds, remnants of pack thread, and old cakes of roses were thinly scattered to make up a show. Noting his penury, to myself I said, as if a man did need a poison now, whose sale is present death in Mantua, here lives a caitiff wretch would sell it him. Oh, this same thought did but forerun my need, and this same needy man must sell it me. As I remember, this should be the house here. Being holiday, the beggar's shop is shut. What ho, apothecary! Enter an apothecary. Who calls so loud? Come hither, man. I see that thou art poor. Hold, there's 40 ducats. Let me have a dram of poison, such soon speeding gear as will disperse itself through all the veins, that the life-weary taker may fall dead, and that the trunk may be discharged of breath as violently as hasty powder fire doth hurry from the fatal cannon's womb. Such mortal drugs I have, but Mantua's law is death to any he that utters them. Art thou so barren, full of wretchedness, and fearest to die? Famine is in thy cheeks, need and oppression starveth in thy eyes, contempt and beggary hangs upon thy back. The world is not thy friend, nor the world's law. The world affords no law to make thee rich. Then be not poor, but break it, and take this. My poverty, not my will, consents. I pay thy poverty, and not thy will. Put this in any liquid thy will, and drink it off. And if you had the strength of 20 men, it would dispatch you straight. There's thy gold. Worse poison to men's souls, doing more murder in this loathsome world than these poor compounds that thou mayst not sell. I sell thee poison. Thou hast sold me none. Farewell. Buy food, and get thyself in flesh. Come, cordial, not poison. Go with me to Juliet's grave, for there must I use thee. Exeunt. Scene 2. Friar Lawrence's cell. Enter Friar John.
Holy Franciscan friar brother! Ho!
Enter Friar Lawrence. This same should be the voice of Friar John. Welcome from Mantua. What says Romeo? Or if his mind be writ, give me his letter.
Going to find a barefoot friar brother out, one of our order, to associate me here in the city, visiting the sick, and finding him. The searchers of the town, suspecting that we both were in a house where the infectious pestilence did reign, sealed up the doors and would not let us forth, so that my speed to Mantua there was stayed.
Who bear my letter to Romeo?
I could not send it. Here it is again. Nor get a messenger to bring it thee. So fearful were they of in infection.
Unhappy fortune. By my brotherhood, the letter was not nice, but full of charge, of dear import, and the neglecting it may do much danger. Friar John, go hence. Get me an iron crow, and bring it straight under my cell.
Brother, I'll go and bring it thee.
Now must I to the monument alone. Within these 3 hours will fair Juliet wake. She will beshrew me much that Romeo hath had no notice of these accidents. But I will write again to Mantua, and keep her at my cell till Romeo come. Poor living corse, closed in a dead man's tomb. Exit.